and welcome to the Mathematicians Podcast, the podcast where we follow the fascinating stories behind the people that count in the history of mathematics. I'm your host, Benjamin Cornish, and today we're talking Boethius. Boethius was born in 480 CE into a noble family of the Roman Empire. He served as a senator and a consul. The two consuls were among the highest-ranking civil administrators of the Republic, so Boethius was a pretty big cheese. However, he only got to enjoy this high life for a short 44 years for the crime of being a peacemaker. Fortunately, in that time, he was able to produce a prolific amount of work on history, philosophy, theology, and, as I shall argue, mathematics. But first, I used to have a friend who was a diplomat, but outside of work, he built with generic building bricks. I shan't say their name because they refused to sponsor this episode, but I'm sure you would recognise their logo. The trouble with my friend is that he would always arrive to events late, or sometimes not arrive at all. And each time he was late, we would all say, "Old Grego's playing with his generic building bricks." The rhyme works better when they sponsor this episode. So one day we decided not to meet at the Australian Embassy, our usual spot to hang out, and instead go over to Grego's house next door. That way he couldn't be late. When we walked through the door, we discovered a magical world to explore. Every flat surface was detailed with intricate scenes in miniature. The centres of the rooms were beautifully constructed architectural replicae of national monuments, and 1,000,000 inhabitants of his house frozen in time with fixed grins, and bricks everywhere you looked. Generic construction bricks. It was like visiting Generic Construction Brick Land, the theme park. We asked Grego how he had found time to do these great works, and he said, after work, but before he leaves to hang out with us, he likes to do just a little bit every day. And this was the reason he was always late. But sometimes it is that in-between time when you can do amazing things. That's when the magic really starts to grow. So let's talk about the Romans. So far, they have occupied a very brief amount of time on our history story. In fact, the vast majority of the tale so far could be described as Turkey, followed by Greece, followed by Egypt, with a smattering of Mediterranean islands in between. We generally call the period ancient Greek maths, in a common way, but that's mainly because our original sources would have been written in a form of ancient Greek script. The people themselves were incredibly diverse and well-travelled, although since the time of Alexander there was a broad Hellenistic hegemony with culture and administration. Again, in case I haven't said it enough, Alexander was Macedonian, which is like saying that William Wallace was British. William Wallace was Scottish, which 500 years later became part of the British Empire. So I suppose he was both, but as with all things, there is nuance. So let's talk about the Romans. In this melting pot of the Med, which for the sake of ease we can just call Greek, there existed a whole host of rival tribes outside of the Greek hegemon. In the southeast there was the Nabatean kingdom, in the southwest the Carthaginian Empire, around the northwest there was the Gauls and the Goths. On the Italian peninsula you had a variety of people. Oh, sorry, I thought that was a reading direction. Let me try again. On the Italian peninsula, you had a lot of Italic people jostling for position amongst the, well, let's just call them the Italians. There was also the Etruscans. Notably distinct from the Italian ancestry, they were a language isolate. And this was the broad strokes of the map around 300 BC, where most of the episode takes place. Oh, hang on, we keep missing them, don't we? So let's talk about the Romans. Well, where are they? So, originating in a small city in the middle of the Italic people, we meet the Romans. We find them first in 750 BCE, they kick out the kings and form a republic in 500 BCE, and by 300 BCE they have defeated the Etruscans and united most of North Italy. By 250 BCE, they have pushed the Greeks out of Sicily and South Italy, and between 200 and 150 BCE, they rapidly ate up the major parts of the Greek Empire, which is why the math story starts to slow down around that time. So by about 225 BCE, the Republic dissolves into the dictatorial empire, and the empire grows from there. So by 258 CE, it has got so big that Emperor Diocletian realises he can't manage it all by himself. So he splits the empire into east and west, with a senior and deputy emperor in each. So this is where we get the tetrarchy. 45 years later, Constantinople is founded, and by 400 CE, the two empires had permanently split into completely separate legal entities, with a strong sense of animosity between them. All the people we have met so far in the story, up to Hypatia, lived before this time. They were all either happily Greek or happily Roman, in terms of the administration, and ethnically they were from anywhere and everywhere all around the Med. But from here on out, when we say Roman, it's going to matter which type of Roman they are. Which one was the real Rome? Well, was it the one whose capital was Rome? Or was it the one that had an ethnically Roman emperor, as opposed to a German or a Goth? I guess it depends on who you ask. And what happened to the Roman Empire next? And again, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the French, they might say that Charlemagne was crowned emperor of the Romans. If you ask the Austrians, well, they will tell you that the Holy Roman Empire was mainly a Habsburg project. If you ask the Russians, they would tell you that the word Tsar is derived from the word Caesar, but because they were the Third Roman Republic. And if you ask the Byzantines, well, they would say, who? Because the word Byzantines wasn't invented when the Byzantines were around. The Byzantines was only invented in the 16th century, but the Byzantines were calling themselves Romans right up until 1453, even though they spoke and wrote in Greek. In fact, they claimed the heritage of both empires, so Greek and Roman, and rightfully so. So I guess everyone in the former lands of the Romans could call themselves the cultural inheritors of the title of Romans. It's a big dynasty to be proud of, even if it isn't yours. And plenty of modern superpowers like to pretend they have a link. So look at the USA, basing their democratic structure on the Roman Senate, with their senators. Or even the Ethiopian Empire in the 1900s claiming ancestry from Rome. By my count, there have been 4 the Third Romes throughout history. So my question was, what happened to the Romans next? And the answer is that some of the tradition goes east and some of it goes west. But with that, we then have to consider how much of the body of knowledge is stored, transferred and translated into these new kingdoms. I've been hinting substantially at the Islamic Golden Age and the scholars translating the Greek to Aramaic, to Arabic, to Latin, and we will go there soon enough. But some of the knowledge is passed into Europe directly, into the early medieval period. Mainly Aristotle, not much Plato, but much of what goes west is theology, Christian theology. Christian theology has had less purpose in the Islamic Golden Age, and that's where all the maths goes east. Some of the maths, though, snuck west as well. Today, we are doing that sneaky maths, Boethius. Boethius is arguably our first proper Roman. He was descended from a senatorial family with ancestors who were emperors themselves. Although he was orphaned at a young age, due to his familial station, he was adopted by an equally esteemed family. His adopted father/father-in-law, that is, he married his adopted sister, his father was an esteemed intellectual and ensured that young Boethius was given a classical education, which is how he became fluent in Greek. We should note that this mastery of the Greek language was now becoming less and less common in the Western Roman Empire, and it's the cause of a lot of loss of knowledge as we move out of the classical era. But based on his education, Boethius is often considered the last classical scholar, which is an odd title as he lived later than St. Augustine, who is considered a medieval scholar. Although, despite being of undisputable Roman pedigree, he served as a consul under a non-Roman emperor. Sort of. In theory, he served the Eastern Emperor Justin, this is the uncle of the famous Justinian, but his Western de facto emperor was Theodoric the Great, an Ostrogoth, Crucially, these two leaders had a divergence in their religious beliefs, that is, of Arian Christianity or the Orthodox Christianity. And it was this divergence and imbalance of power that led to Boethius' death. One day, Theodoric accused one of his senators of conspiring with the emperor in the East. Boethius defended his colleague by saying, "If he's guilty, then so am I, and so is the entire Senate." To which the rest of the Senate stayed silent, and only Boethius and the other guy got executed. Luckily for all of history, he was on death row for about a year, which gave him plenty of time to do what I'm sure we would all have done in his position: write a 5-part book called the Consolation of Philosophy, summarising all of his philosophical positions. In the Consolation, Boethius writes a lot of poetry and dialogue of his interactions with an imagined interlocutor, the incarnation of Lady Philosophy. It talks in detail about destiny, the nature of happiness, but more crucially from a mathematical perspective, the nature of free will. Free will? That sounds far too close to philosophy. Well, yes and no. It allows us to explore the nature of causation, and an early attempt at temporal logic. So, a quick reminder then about the different ideas of cause in ancient times. In the Aristotelian tradition, there are 4 causes that might explain why something exists. Consider my ice cream van. Why does there exist an ice cream van on my driveway? Well, there is the material cause. So my ice cream van exists because a bunch of metal, plastic and lost dreams all coexist in the same area to produce an ice cream van. If the entire thing was made out of a different material, for instance, ice cream, then it would be an art installation of an ice cream van, but not a functional ice cream van. The substance that something is made of causes the item to be or not be. And then we have the formal cause, that is, what form or arrangement the raw materials take. My van could still be metal and plastic. However, with a few tweaks here and there, one could change the nature of the clutch to wear out in such a manner that the replacement becomes untenable, and the metal crusher at the scrapyard converts the material arrangement into a cube of the same material. So it is the arrangement of a substance that causes me to own or not own an ice cream van or cube of metal. After that, we have the efficient cause. So this is the thing that brings something about. An ice cream van exists on my driveway because 13 years ago I went to someone's house who was selling an ice cream van and stole it. Thus, it exists here. Or perhaps I could say that 28 years ago, a mechanic brought together the pieces of metal and plastic and shaped it into an ice cream van mould, as per the instructions. I should say my ice cream van is mould-free, but it is still in the mould of an ice cream van. Alternatively, we might discuss the final cause, the reason that something exists. This is perhaps the only cause of something that we still consider today without sounding pedantic. When someone asks, "Why is there an ice cream van on your driveway?" I would say, "Because I want to drive around selling ice creams." In Boethius, we meet the claim that all things strive towards existence. God, as the creator, is the source of existence. Thus, we can say that God is the ultimate cause of all things. However, this is where the notion of a chain of events becomes interesting. If A causes B, this generally implies an essence of time or ordering. But if God causes everything, that's going to confuse the nature of time, as God is atemporal, that is, he does not exist within time, but outside of it. Here we can see something you might call providence. That is, God causes all things to be, designs the plan for them, and pre-writes the chain of events of the whole universe, again, outside of the time paradigm of causality. Boethius contrasts this atemporal cause with a time-based cause that he calls fate. And this is the unfolding of the divine plan through a nature of cause and effect, whether it is a natural law, like gravity, a human action of free will, or a probabilistic law of accidental events. All of these fit within the banner of fate, underneath divine providence. This then leads to an interesting question of necessity. If God can know all things, and indeed plan all things, then in what sense did these things necessarily happen? If I am breaking into the house of a former ice cream van owner, I will be acting with free will and in response to the angry dog that I find accidentally. However, when the previous owner watches my interaction with said dog on CCTV the following morning, my actions will have already occurred and will necessarily fall in the same order each time he re-watches the CCTV footage. But then, if each action is necessary, that is, it could not be any other way, then in what sense do we have a free will-based human cause? So now, Boethius decomposes necessity into different categories. A simple necessity is one where something is true almost by definition. If I am thinking of a natural number, it is necessarily real. A conditional necessity is one that is true but did not need to be true. So if I flip a coin and catch it on the table with my hand, there is a possibility that it is a heads or a tails. I don't know, and therefore I cannot say it is necessarily either heads or tails. But when I look at it, I can say that it was heads when it landed, then remained heads until I took my hand away, and hey look, it's still heads. But this knowledge was only gained after having looked at it. Still, landing heads is not a necessary feature of the coin, because it could have been tails. Unless, of course, it is that coin that my pirate friend uses to determine whose round it is at the pub. One reason I love this as an early insight in the free will debate is that it doesn't necessarily singularly relate to an all-knowing deity. In fact, we can consider the free will argument entirely from a physics and classical mechanics point of view. Is there free will in a world driven entirely by particles bumping together? Surely not. But then that would imply there is also no such thing as a random outcome, which also feels false. A quantum scientist might tell you that random chance is a necessary feature of the quantum mechanical paradigm, which is a better description of the universe than the classical deterministic view. So maybe there is free will? But then the same quantum scientist might say that their calculations are not time directional. That is, everything works backwards in a way that is just as consistent. In fact, from within the universe, it is impossible to say which way time is going. Much like that we say in a car driving at a constant velocity, it's impossible to say what direction we are driving in. But this makes the future just as necessary and static as the past. And we are back to God as the atemporal observer, except this time it's a mathematician at a chalkboard that is the atemporal observer. It's really fun. This links nicely to the problem of temporal propositions, that is, statements of truth that are time-dependent. And this again comes from Aristotle in his famous problem of the sea battle. Aristotle asserts that there exists a problematic statement that must negate free will. Consider the comment that tomorrow there will be a sea battle. If there is indeed a sea battle, then the statement will have been true. If there is not, the statement must have been false. Either way, true or false, the statement was made the previous day, and the truth determined the previous day, thus demonstrating a necessity over the occurrence, or not, of the sea battle. Aristotle makes an attempt to resolve this paradox. However, his solution is debated, and this is where Boethius engages with Aristotle to clarify his own interpretation of Aristotle's solution. That is to say, the statement about the sea battle is neither true nor false, as it cannot be determined. It is not necessary. Rather, it gains a statement of truth at the time of the sea battle or absence thereof. This is a departure from what might be called a Boolean logic, that is, everything must be true or false, and it provides the third option, not yet determined. Although not fully analysed or described, this will be an early seed for the eventual development of temporal logic, and that is logic that is time or order dependent. It was Boethius that translated the works of Aristotle from Greek to Latin, which is how the Western European tradition gained its first link to classical Greek work. Although I should point out that he only managed to finish Aristotle's logical work. The West didn't discover the rest of Aristotle until the Arabic translation movement. It's also why Aristotle and not Plato is regarded as the authority figure in the West for so long, as sadly Boethius did not finish his project of translating all of Aristotle and then all of Plato. How the West could have turned out differently if we were more Platonic and less logical. On the topic of the translation movement from Greek to Latin, it was again Boethius that saved the quadrivium and gave it direct to Latin scholars, without the need to wait for reintroduction by Islamic scholars centuries later. But aside from his great prison epic and the translations, Boethius also wrote his own original works of logic. For instance, in De Topicae Differentiis, he analyses types of argument, drawing from Aristotle and Cicero in a combination of logic and rhetoric. This uses the word topic to describe a place from which an argument may arise. Here he distinguishes from a maxim, that is a general self-evident proposition, and a topical differentiae, the distinguishing characteristics or ways in which these arguments can be used. Broadly speaking, this is following the Aristotelian tradition of predicate logic, that is the logic of sets and characteristics, and this formed the basis of much of the medieval's obsession with logical discourse. In De Hypotheticis Syllogismis, he wrote a great detail about propositional logic, which we first met with Chrysippus back in episode 27, and the Stoics. These are the if-then, or either-or statements. In Boethius's work, we gain new tools or operations to connect propositional statements. So consider the following three statements. A, I have an ice cream van. B, I am an ice cream man. And C, I make money selling ice creams. All three propositions are true, but what about A implies B? As we say in the business, the ice cream van does not the ice cream man make. So A does not imply B. A implies B is false. Just that I have an ice cream van doesn't make me an ice cream man. So what about A union B? Well, yes, this is true, because I have both an ice cream van and I am an ice cream man. Okay. Does A imply C? No. Having an ice cream van does not imply that I make money selling ice creams. Does B imply C? Also no. Being an ice cream man doesn't mean that I make money selling ice creams. I might not have a van. So what about A intersection B implies C? Yes, this is a true statement. If I both have an ice cream van and I am an ice cream man, I will necessarily make money from selling ice creams. Boethius gave us the ability to build ever more detailed and structured logical statements, and, spoiler alert, the medieval monks of the Middle Ages had far too much fun with this. Boethius didn't quite systematise necessity and sufficiency as the modal logical elements of truth, but he did discuss what must be and what can be, which is an early precursor to these ideas as well. So Boethius, a man of logic, of fundamental Aristotelian translation, and of free will, the fork in the road that turned west and defined the focus of philosophical inquiry for nearly 1,000 years. No wonder we mainly did theology. He was a Christian, but he didn't let that get in the way of a good logical discussion. And he died younger than he should have done, and cut off the transition of knowledge to the West, thus changing everything we think of as the European academia. And that's it for the Mathematicians podcast. But if you want to hear more from me, you can find me on Blue Sky at mathematicians-pod, where you can tag me in a picture of your cat. Next week, we will be going back to Alexandria before we all start getting withdrawal symptoms and starting a skip-fire of an argument over the nature of infinity. It's time for John Philoponus next week on the Mathematicians podcast. Until then, goodbye. Oh, the music normally comes in here. I guess I could read some of Boethius's poetry? Oh, go on then. Though the covetous grown wealthy see his piles of gold rise high, though he gather store of treasure that can never satisfy, though with pearls his gorget blazes, rarest that the ocean yields, though 100 head of oxen travail in his ample field, ne'er shall carking care forsake him, while he draws this vital breath, and his riches go not with him, when his eyes are closed in death. The music today is Dance Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find find more information in the show notes.